At this place in history, we're in Plymouth Notch with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. Steve, what are we doing here today?
So we're going to talk about Achsa Sprague, who was a spiritualist from the mid-19th century. She talked to dead people. So this is a great story. So she was born here, taught at the Stone Schoolhouse here. She died fairly young, but I think the best place to talk about a spiritualist is at her gravesite. So we're going to go across town to the cemetery to go check it out.
So my first question, how does one discover that they can speak with the dead? How did that come about?
So Achsa Sprague was living in the mid-19th century. She was born in 1827, and by the time we got to like the 1840s, 1850s, let's just say it was a thing. And often young women, would go into a trance and would then become a vehicle or a conduit for a spirit to embody, come through them and speak to an audience of people. And it's not like we think of it today with like ghost hunters. It was more about spiritualism, more about being closer to God, being closer to yourself, and communing with ancestors who may have gone before you.
And for Achsa, this actually came about after an illness, correct?
She had what we now think was probably rheumatoid arthritis, but she was quite the diarist, and she wrote a lot of letters. And in fact, she has a poet too, so she wrote a lot of poetry, and she wrote about this, and she said, "A young girl in a darkened room, chained by disease, a living tomb." Wow. So that was describing her illness. She attributed let's say, remission of this illness to a spiritual intercession. She felt she was in the depths of this disease. She couldn't move. She was in pain. An angel came to her, spoke to her, and she was able to move again. She was able to go out. And so that's how she became a medium. So she started speaking locally, and she became so famous that she started going on this tour, and she would travel. She traveled to Chicago, Milwaukee, and then back to Boston, speaking to huge auditoriums full of people. She had a huge fan club. Men especially would write to her proposing marriage, and they'd never met her before. It seems that she may have been in love with one of these letter writers, a married man, and they had quite the letter writing exchange. And in fact, an author published a book a few years ago with the Vermont Historical Society using those letters and kind of talking about her life through letters. We talk a lot about the spiritualism. She also was a huge proponent of women's rights. She said that women could be one of two things, a slave or a butterfly, and she did not want to be either one. She was a big proponent of temperance and also abolitionism. So she talked a lot about the horrors of slavery and used this people speaking from the other side to talk about these various aspects of society. Like I said, she died in 1862, relatively young. She had about 7 years of good health, and in fact the book is called 7 Years of Grace. But then she got sick again and died. But you can see it says here, went home, and then on the bottom it says, "I still live." And so her friends said after she died, they could come to this gravesite and still commune with her, and she would still give them messages to bring back to the living.
At this place in history.